Hello and welcome back to our Photoshop tutorials. In this lesson I will focus on resizing photographs, images and graphics using some of the basic tools that Photoshop has to offer. Now if you're just starting with photo editing and mastering your skills in Photoshop, I'm sure that this lesson will provide enough information for you to speed up your work process. So in order to get started, let's just open a sample photograph, and in here I have one downloaded from Stock Exchange, Photo Stock Exchange, and this picture was taken by African FX photographer. And uh, whenever you open an image in Photoshop uh, and you want to change its size, you can go into Image and then Image Size. A shortcut for this one on your keyboard is Alt, Control, and I. When you click on that, a dialog box will open, and in here you can see a couple of properties of this image. So the first one is dimensions, and this one is roughly about 17 megabytes. And now document size, its width, its height, and resolution. Now let's start from the bottom one. So let's say resolution. The higher the resolution is, the better the photograph will turn out when it's printed. For web purposes, and if you're sending proofs to your clients, I would recommend using resolution of 72, which is the native resolution for, let's say, web images. The reason for using a 72 resolution would be that the size of the file that you're sending or emailing would be much smaller than the original. And in this case, you can see that the original image was about 17 megabytes, and now if we were to change this resolution to 72, our image would be just about slightly over 1 megabyte. So if I click OK, you can see that this image is a lot smaller, and it's a nice preview for a customer to see what changes you've made, or how the photo looks. Now, in order to go back one step in Photoshop, and we want to just return to the original image resolution to 300, we can just use a Control Z shortcut, and that will basically take us back to how this photo looked at the beginning. Now let's go back to image size, and I wanted to talk about these two values being linked together. Constraint proportions is what controls these values having a relationship with each other. And the way it works is that, let's say if we want to change the width of this image to 5 inches, Photoshop will automatically recalculate the height value, and this way the aspect ratio between height and width is maintained. So if I click OK, now the image just basically shrunk 50%, or it got twice as small. And let's go back one more step and go back into image size, and I'll just show you the difference between having this constraint proportions checked and unchecked. Now let's uncheck this one, and let's type in our width to be 5. Now you can see that the height did not change, just because since these are not linked together now, I'm decreasing the width only, and the height will remain the same. So if I click OK, now your image just shrunk 50%, but the height remained the same. Now in photography, obviously we want to change the image sizes proportionally. So whenever you're scaling your image or scaling it to fit into a frame of a digital template, you want to make sure that both of these are checked. Now let's go back into our layer palette and see how this looks. Normally when Photoshop opens an image, it will have a lock right next to it, and also there is an eye icon that's placed on the left hand side. What that is, it's a layer visibility. So if you click on that, it will hide that layer from view. And if this locket is placed here, the image cannot be edited in Photoshop. What that would mean is, let's say if I take a paintbrush tool and I would like to paint something on this image, I can't do that. Photoshop will just warn me right away that this layer is locked. So the easiest way to get that removed is just by clicking the lock icon and unlocking the layer. And depending on the version of Photoshop, you might have those palettes, layer palettes and tools being colored a little bit differently, being arranged a little bit differently. But these are very basic techniques. So even if you go back to as far as Photoshop 6.0, you're gonna have the same type of tools available to you. So now another option of getting this layer unlocked is simply dragging this, lock it to your trash can, and now this layer can be edited. Now let's focus on changing the size of that image on the screen and incorporating that into, let's say, some sort of graphic you're working on or a template. For that purpose, I will just create a new layer so we have some sort of a background on which we can view this layer against. And to do that, we can just click on Create New Layer icon here, and Photoshop automatically names that as Layer 1. So in order for us to, let's say, change these names so it's not confusing, we'll just double click right on the text that's next to the layer thumbnail, and we will name this one as photo, and let's rename this layer as background. Now what we want is, let's say, some solid color to fill in our background so we can see what's actually going on. Let's go ahead and fill this in with some light gray color. We can click on the foreground color picker and select some sort of light gray color. And now let's fill in this background layer by selecting Paint Bucket tool. Now this layer is on the top of our photo. So basically, if you think about it as two sheets of paper, if I fill this layer in, it will basically cover the entire photograph, and that's what happens. Now, obviously, we want our background to be underneath the photo layer so we can see the photo itself. So now let's just drag it, and you can basically do that with multiple layers and arrange them into a composition. Now, in order to change the size of the photo on the screen that you're working on, a very handy tool and shortcut in Photoshop is Control-T. What Control-T does, it allows you to apply a free transformation, and you can navigate to that by going into Edit, Free Transform, clicking on that, and you can see that Photoshop places anchors right around our photograph. And what these do, if you place your mouse cursor right on the top of one of these anchors, you can just drag them to the side, and you can see that Free Transform allows us to change, let's say, the width or the height of the photograph. Now, a nice trick to make sure that both the height and the width are constrained, meaning that the aspect ratio is met and we're not making this photo, let's say, too wide or changing its size without maintaining the proportions, is to hold Shift on your keyboard. And when you drag at one of those anchor points, you can see that the image gets scaled. Both the height and the width of the image get scaled proportionally. Now let's press Enter. And another really useful option is to rotate the image. So let's say sometimes you have an image in horizontal position, you want it vertical, and we can use the same shortcut, Control-T on your keyboard. And if you place your mouse cursor not on the top of the anchor point, but just about several, let's say half an inch away from it, you can see that the cursor is changing, and it allows us to rotate this image to whichever direction we want and whichever direction we want to place in our composition. So let's say if I go back and press Control-T again, if you hold Shift key on your keyboard and you start rotating, the rotation is locked into 15-degree increments. So this way, if I want to have a perfect 90-degree rotation, I can achieve that. And without holding Shift key, this would be very difficult, just because we would have to take a little bit more time to make sure it's completely aligned. By holding Shift, I'm pretty confident that I will get perfect 15-degree rotations every time. Now, another option of applying a rotation or transforming your image is by going into Edit, Transform, and let's say Rotation counterclockwise or counterclockwise and clockwise. So if I just want to rotate it simply by 90 degrees. We can just do that. And let me undo that step, Control Z. And let's say if I want to flip this image, um, sort of like using a mirror way of flipping it, meaning I want the head of the model to be on the left hand side, and I want to reposition the rest or her body to the right hand side. So what I would do is go into Edit, Transform, and we can flip this in 2 dimensions. One is horizontally and one is vertically. So if I want to place the head of the model on the left-hand side, I would just flip it horizontally. And you can see that that completely changes the perspective of this image. Now, another really nice feature of Photoshop is blending modes and opacity. I will leave more intricate details of that for future tutorials, but I just wanted to touch upon, let's say, opacity of a layer opacity. And there's two options of changing that. You can use the slider, or you can simply type in a value for opacity. And what that is, it controls transparency of the layer. So if you can see that my opacity right now being at 30%, meaning 30% of the colors in this photo are showing, and then 70% of that is transparent to the background that's underneath it. Now let's return our opacity to 100%. And let's create a similar image that I showed you right at the beginning. So in order to do that, the first thing that you can notice is that our background in here was the actual photo of that model, but opacity was decreased to probably about roughly 30%. So before we start, we want to make a duplicate copy of this layer so we can retain it for other transformations in order to make it smaller and duplicate it again and again. Just because if you go back to, let's say, go back to this original image, we can see that there is actually 4 photos in here. One is for the background, then a bigger thumbnail image, smaller, and the smallest one. So to get started with that, what we can do is I will just flip this one back to its original position. So we got transform, flip, obviously horizontally. Now we can duplicate this layer, and there's 2 options of doing that in Photoshop. Now, the first one is right-clicking on the layer and selecting Duplicate Layer. Now, when you do that, Photoshop will open a dialog box asking you for the name of the new layer. So let's say Photo Small. And here, Photoshop just created another duplicate, which is identical to our original photo. Now, what I want to do, I'm just going to hide that big photo that's underneath it, and I will transform this one. So Control T, holding Shift key on your keyboard, I will just make it smaller. Now press Enter, and if you want to move that layer around the screen, you can use a free move tool in Photoshop, and making sure that Auto Select Layers is checked, and now I can place it wherever I want to on the screen. Now if I bring in our original photo, you can see that now both of these layers can be moved on the screen without interfering with each other. So I can also change colors and rotate them independent of each other. Now, let's go ahead and change the opacity of this layer to, let's say, 30%. Okay, now we have a background layer that's transparent and a small photo. Now, another way of duplicating layer in Photoshop is by using a shortcut, holding down your Control or Option on the Mac, and then Alt key. Now, if you have your mouse cursor on the top of the layer that you want to duplicate, in this case it's going to be Photo Small, we can just click and drag, and I can make multiple copies of that layer. Now let me undo a couple of these duplicates, and now we have, let's say, three different layers that are independent of each other, and we can just align them and place them wherever we want to in Photoshop and wherever we want to in our graphic in this case. Now let's talk about one more option. I want to make this image, let's say, very wide, but the height is going to be small. So for this, a really useful tool is the crop tool that you can use on any photograph in Photoshop. And what that one does, you can just drag that from one corner of the photograph to another. And this version of Photoshop is CS6, so it looks a little bit different, but the principle remains the same. The idea here is that everything that is within this box stays on your in your creation, or in your photograph, or the image that you're working with, and everything that is outside of that area will get deleted. So if I press enter, now you can see that the things that remained are my 3 layers that I just duplicated, my original photo with opacity changed to 30%, and my background. Now let's go ahead and play around with these photos a little bit more. Now let's go ahead and place this one to the left, rotate it slightly, and what we can do with the other ones, we can just do the same thing, also rotate them, but let's just scale them down. So holding shift, dragging, and now I can just arrange them in a nicer, more interesting, let's say, composition. There is no fixed rule on how you want to do that, and obviously you can play around with your own photographs and so on. And okay, so now at this point, let's just make our background layer a little bit smaller so it fits the other photographs a little bit better. So I'm just going to hold Shift key on the keyboard one more time, and I'm just going to reposition that so it fits nicely and creates a nice layout for this graphic. Now here we have 4 separate layers, and these can be obviously unclicked. If you click on the icon, you can hide all of them. And again, I want to apply a crop tool just because I don't need that extra gray background in here. So just going into your tools, crop tool, then clicking on one of the layers, and Photoshop does a really good job as far as selecting the edges. Then whatever is highlighted stays, whatever is darkened, it's going to get deleted. So let's press enter, and now we have our little startup graphic. Now at this point you can place text or borders in here, and apply also styles to your layers. Now obviously I'm not going to talk about a lot of that in this lesson, but just to show you some of the features, you can double click any of these layers and apply, let's say, a drop shadow, which makes the photo stand out from its background. It looks more three-dimensional. So these are blending modes, or blending options, or layer styles palette, which I opened. So to get to this, you can just right click on your layer and go into blending options. Or another way of doing that is just double clicking not on the text or the thumbnail, but right next to your text. So if you double click that, that will open that layer style box, and then here we can just drop shadow. And drop shadow works in a way that you can obviously control its blending mode, and I just set it to normal for this example. Its opacity, so how hard that drop shadow will be displayed on the screen. And now let's just go ahead and once we have this selected, we can just move it underneath the photo, and we can move it around the screen whichever way you want the shadow to actually fall. Let's just set it up right here. And I will just, to make it look a little bit more natural, we can just decrease the size or the opacity of it, and also decrease the size. And what that's going to do, it's going to blend it in a little bit more sort of natural way into our background. Now that's one of many blending options that you can apply to your images, but that's for extra lessons and different tutorials. So let's click OK, and I just wanted to show you here how this works. So we applied this drop shadow effect to this small photo layer, and Photoshop allows us to obviously hide it. If we don't like that, we can just click on that icon that's next to drop shadow, and we can hide one effect, or we can hide all effects at once, because you can have multiple effects. Now another really nice feature in Photoshop is that you can copy all of these effects without and apply them to other layers without actually going in and adjusting those blending modes. So if I like this setup here, I can just right click on this layer and then go into copy layer style. Now this is saved, this effect of drop shadow is saved into Photoshop's memory. So now we can click on our copy, which is this middle layer here, and right click, and then paste layer style. Now see what happens. Our shadow just appeared underneath this photo. Now let's do the same thing for this one and paste layer style. And with just move tool, you can reposition your layers wherever you want to in Photoshop and design your own compositions. So I hope that lesson was useful, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and please look forward towards other tutorials that we have ready for you.